It's time for Brush Street Beat, presented by our friends at McLaren Health Care. And today's guest is a returning guest, Evan Woodberry of MLive, Tigers writer. Evan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us again today.
Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, and there's quite a bit of Tigers news to talk about. After hiring AJ Hinch, the Tigers have made some more changes to their coaching staff, including the hiring of Chris Fetter as the pitching coach. He spent the last 3 seasons with Michigan, the University of Michigan's baseball team. What do you make of the hire?
I thought it was really interesting and really intriguing, and probably one of those things that only a couple of years ago you wouldn't even talk about the idea of a college coach making the jump to the big leagues. It just wasn't something done. It wasn't in the culture of baseball. But as the technology increased, the colleges in a lot of ways were more on the forefront than some of the big league organizations. And so what happened was a lot of college coaches were learning a lot of the technology. We're really up to date on a lot of the technology, on a lot of the new stuff. And you have a guy with a track record like Chris Fetter, who had helped a lot of pitchers, who was gaining a reputation nationally. And suddenly a lot of major league teams were calling him. So I think it was just a great situation all the way around, where you have, obviously, the Tigers are just down the street for him. He doesn't even have to sell his house in Ann Arbor. He can just commute from there. And then he's got a long-standing relationship with AJ Hinch. So it was a perfect combination to get really one of the better respected college coaches in the nation. And I think it kind of sets a good tone for the entire coaching staff, that they're willing to not consider just a typical candidate, but to really look far and wide and consider a guy that has a really innovative track record and a really strong reputation as one of the better young coaches in baseball.
Evan, I think you kind of touched upon it when you said, innovation, and we hear analytics, and we hear that, for years, maybe the Tigers were a little bit behind the curve. And now with, and we had the gentleman on, I can't remember his name now, from USC, who was really into the analytics and brought the Tigers into this century. What I'm curious about for old codgers like myself is that, I always looked at ERA or batting average and power numbers, and I determined whether a player was good or not. Can you talk about this advancement for a lot of people? They hear about analytics, but I think, and honestly, they're not really sure what exactly are you saying.
Right. And I think it's one of those terms that is now used so often that it's almost kind of lost its meaning, because it can mean a lot of different things. I think the most interesting thing that Chris Fetter said during his introductory press conference was, in a lot of ways, analytics is just giving new language to something that coaches have known for 30 years, or it's giving them a way to see with data things that they've known for years and years. In other words, a coach that has coached pitching for 30 years can watch a guy pitch and say, wow, that's a really nasty curveball. But now you can say, okay, here's the number of the spin. Here's his spin rate on the curveball. Here's how it compares to the other top 100 prospects in baseball right now. Here's how it compares to everyone else in the organization. You can even go deeper and say, okay, going to the Dominican Republic in our Dominican Academy, here's how it compares there. So it gives you a way of saying, instead of, wow, this is a really nasty curveball, or you can actually say, with data, he has the most spins than anyone in our entire organization, and we have all this data to prove it. Or we can say, wow, his curveball is spinning at a rate dramatically different than it was last year. What happened? Or he's going in the wrong direction last year. What happened? I think it just, as this data accumulates and they have all these ways of charting it and developing it over time, I think it's just kind of a different way of analyzing what was always there, but it just is more precise now. And I think that's something that he did it really well at Michigan, is take that information and apply it to players. I think that was another interesting thing that he said in the press conference, is his experience with the Los Angeles Dodgers was they had a lot of really smart guys with the Los Angeles Dodgers who were developing a lot of really great data, a lot of information, but they were trying to find a way to bring it to players. And that's the big part of it, is to kind of find that link. Is if you have books and reams of information, spreadsheets, data, video, that's all great, but unless you can convey it to players in a way that can help them in a meaningful way, it's utterly useless. And I think that's where his skills will also pay off, and that he has, the quote unquote old school track record. He's been a pitcher, he's been a coach, he has a lot of experience on both sides, but he can also use some of that new technology and new data to help them make it work in real life scenarios.
Evan, Juan Nieves was also named the assistant pitching coach right there with Chris Fetter. And you're talking about that press conference. AJ Hinch made it very clear. He also spoke during that press conference that he wanted this coaching tandem, this duo together. And it was one of his first tasks that he wanted to take care of as the Tigers manager. What is it about Juan Nieves and him and Fetter together that you think AJ Hinch likes so much?
Yeah, I noticed that as well, that really, realistically, it was a press conference about Chris Fetter, but AJ Hinch really took great pains to mention Juan Nieves and say that he is a big part of this puzzle as well. And I wish I could remember who gave me this anecdote, but it was last year at some point, and it was one of the pitchers that was talking about Juan Nieves, and it wasn't a top prospect. It was just a guy that was at AAA Toledo, and he said something along the lines of, Juan Nieves is the type of guy, he puts in so much work that he will pull an all-nighter looking at video, looking at the opposing team, trying to come up with a game plan. If he thinks it'll help make his pitcher just a little bit better in that next start, that he is so invested in his pitcher's success and wants so badly for them to have success that, pitchers see that, they appreciate that, they see how hard he's working, they see the buy-in that he has, and, that's the way that you build loyalty. I mean, everything I've heard from the pitchers that have worked under him, that's what they speak about as his work ethic and the fact that he really, really wants to see them succeed. So I was not surprised when they found a way to get him to the big league level, because I knew organizationally they really liked Juan Nieves a lot. And this is kind of a good fit in that, he is going to go work in the bullpen during games, but not necessarily be a bullpen coach per se. They made a real point of saying he's the assistant pitching coach. And I think the reason they wanted to say that was to say he's going to be right there with Chris Fetter, involved in both the hands-on coaching, as well as the data, as well as the video, as well as all that stuff, and that he's going to be active with pitchers, both starters and relievers, because he does have that track record of being a big league coach that gives him credibility with the veterans, but also being there in Toledo, which means he knows personally just about every one of the Tigers' young pitchers.
Another hire that kind of caught, I think, everyone's eye because he interviewed for the managerial job is George Lombard as the bench coach. Again, I don't want to keep dating myself here, but, before, I guess the pitching coach was always pretty important. And then it was like, the manager then had all his drinking buddies surround him. And that was your first base coach, your third, it was like a boys club. That's not how it is. But getting Lombard right now has got to be I don't know. Is that a coup? It sure seems like a coup for me.
Yeah, I mean, the Dodgers are really considered, obviously they just won the World Series and they have a ton of money to spend, but because they have a ton of money to spend, they're not just spending it on free agents, they're spending it on the entire infrastructure from top to bottom. So they're considered really one of the most progressive and forward-thinking organizations because they have tons of resources to throw at everything. So to get somebody who's considered a rising star in that organization, I think is a really big hire. And from George Lombard's perspective, you could say, okay, well, why is he leaving the Dodgers who just won the World Series? It's because you mentioned it as the bench coach. It's like the second in command. It's the guy that sits next to the manager. It's the guy that when the manager's ejected, he becomes the manager. And generally it's, you're going to get those interviews for manager jobs when you're the bench coach because you've been considered the second in command at that point. So I think it's good for George Lombard's career to take this job. I think it shows, a willingness for AJ Hinch to go outside his comfort zone and not just, get his buddy, like you said, to be the bench coach, but to get somebody that's considered really a rising star in this business and very well might leave within a year or two to be a manager after having taken this job.
Well, Evan, it really seems like the coaching staff is coming together here very shortly after AJ Hinch was named the manager. One other question I want to touch on with you is the free agency market right now. We know that teams can now talk to other teams, but we haven't seen very much action when it comes to that. When do you think that will start? Maybe not even just for the Tigers, but really for the MLB in general.
Well, it's interesting. I thought this would be very, very late this year just because of the uncertainty of 2021 and a million other factors. There was one signing that caught my eye, and that was only because I had him on a list of guys that Tigers should target, and I had to take him off the list because he signed abruptly, and that was Robbie Ray, who was a Tigers prospect once upon a time. Was now a free agent left-handed pitcher, and he went to the Toronto Blue Jays for, I think, 1 year, $8 million or so, which is a pretty good deal to get this early in the process. And to me, what that shows me is that, yes, a lot of teams are going to be waiting until the very end, but also because the players know that so many teams are going to be waiting until the very end. If you make a fair deal to a player right now, even though it's very early in the process, they may be liable to take it and say, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to wait until January or February to see what happens, because of the uncertainty in this climate, if you make a reasonable offer, there may be a guy that takes it right now, whereas in a normal year, they'd say, no, thanks, I'd like to wait and see how the market develops. So we'll see if that is a factor at all, because I think the Tigers have a couple of guys that might be on their list who are probably just 1 year contract type guys. And if you want them and you want to make a 1 year offer and make a fair deal, and maybe they're not going to hold out and wait for that second year or wait for a few extra $1 million. Maybe they'll be willing to sign right now, just because it's not just the owners and the GMs that are dealing with that uncertainty. The players are dealing with that uncertainty too. And I think that's going to make this a really unpredictable type free agency, an unpredictable winter, because no one is really sure what's going to happen or when it's going to happen.
Evan, very, very quickly, I've got my whole family just psyched because I keep talking about this. So yes or no, when the season starts, whenever that is next year, is James McCann the Tigers catcher?
From what I've read, he's holding out for his goal is a 2 year deal. And I think the Tigers, if they go and sign a catcher, would probably be looking for more of a 1 year guy. So I think it's possible. I think the Tigers still love James McCann. I think he still loves Detroit. But I think where he is coming off a really strong year, I think he's going to try to maximize his value as much as possible in free agency. And I'm not sure there's going to be a match there with the Tigers.
Just crushing Art's entire family's hopes.
Oh, man. A lot of priests, too, that I know love James McCann. They all want him to be a Tiger again.
He's a good guy. He was fun to cover. I'd love to have him back as well. But, we'll see. It's going to be, like I said, it's going to be an unpredictable winter. So we'll see what happens.
Definitely. It's already shaping up to be an interesting offseason for the Tigers. So, Evan, we will definitely be keeping in touch with you as this offseason progresses. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And, of course, a big thank you to McLaren Health Care for presenting Brush Street Beat right here on the Word on Woodward.